Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's story follows Commander Elias Wren, the last surviving human, who is found asleep inside a massive, dead warship called the Revenant, only for the ship's ancient AI Aegis to begin waking up as a galaxy-devouring machine swarm returns from the darkness. The lesson is powerful. Never underestimate someone who looks weak or ordinary, because true strength can be intelligence, discipline, and the courage to stay calm when everything is collapsing. And even more importantly, power without conscience is dangerous. So real leadership means taking responsibility for what you control and choosing the hardest path to protect others. If you enjoyed this story and the life lesson behind it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more English stories. For longer than anyone could remember, the ship had been a corpse. It tumbled through the vast expanse like a coffin adrift on a dark sea, a silent ghost in a graveyard of shattered rock and cosmic dust. Not a single light glowed along its hull. Its engines were cold and dead. It just drifted, pushed along by some ancient momentum, a forgotten relic in a galaxy that had long since left it behind. Overseer Karath was the first to spot it, a strange flicker on the long-range sensors of his flagship, the Thalin carrier Infinite Purpose. The readings were a contradiction. The object was far too big to be an asteroid and too perfectly formed to be space junk, yet it was too cold and lifeless to be a ship. But there was no mistaking its shape. The sharp angles, the armored hull, and the weapon emplacements running down its spine like the teeth of some abyssal predator. It was a warship. A monster of a thing, measuring 7.2 kilometers from bow to stern. Karath stood in the heart of his command center, arms clasped behind his back, the blue light of the holographic display shimmering across his compound eyes. Around him, the crew of the Infinite Purpose chittered and clicked in their hive tongue, sharing data through bursts of pheromones and swift gestures. The Thalin were an insectoid race, tall and encased in natural chitin that could shrug off small arms fire, with mandibles strong enough to snap stone. They were a hive mind in motion, the most formidable military force within the Conquered, the 12-species galactic council that ruled known space. Fear was not an emotion they entertained. And yet, Karath felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in all his years of service. It was a cold, heavy unease that settled deep in his thorax. "Run that silhouette against every known ship class in the database," he commanded. His sensor officer complied instantly. The search took a whole 11 seconds. The result? Nothing. No match, no record. Not a single species in the known galaxy had ever designed a ship that looked anything like this. The vessel had strange markings etched into its hull. Angular symbols that looked like they'd been burned deep into the armor with energy tools. The symbols were precise, deliberate, and utterly alien. The Thalin linguistic database held over 900,000 languages and dialects from every corner of the galaxy. None of them were a match. "Could be pre-Conquered," his second-in-command suggested. "Maybe a relic from the expansion wars? Some forgotten colony ship?" Karath stared at the hologram. That ship wasn't designed to carry colonists. Every single line, every angle, every plate of its armor screamed a single, brutal purpose. This was a machine engineered to kill. It was made to destroy things, and to keep on destroying them long after any sane creature would have given up. "Get a boarding party ready," Karath ordered. "Full hazard protocols. I want environmental suits, weapon teams, and a science detachment, and nobody lays a hand on anything until I say so." The boarding shuttle made the trip from the Infinite Purpose to the dead warship in 12 minutes. As they got closer, the true, terrifying scale of the thing became gut-wrenchingly clear. The Thalin shuttle was the size of a city block, but against the warship, it looked like a tiny beetle crawling up the side of a mountain. The vessel's hull was pockmarked with thousands of tiny craters from centuries of being pelted by micrometeoroids. Underneath all that damage, the armor was a deep, dark metal that seemed to swallow the light, with a faint sheen that the science team couldn't identify. They located an airlock on the port side, about halfway down its length. It took the engineering team a full 40 minutes to muscle it open. The internal mechanisms were frozen solid and corroded with age. But even in its dead state, the engineers noticed something bizarre. The airlock was designed with 3 separate redundant locking systems. If the first one failed, the second would engage. If both of those failed, the third would still hold the line. Whoever built this ship was paranoid, assuming that everything would eventually break and that disaster was inevitable. They had planned for it with a level of stubbornness that was almost insane. The boarding party finally stepped through the breach. The corridors inside were dark, but it was a heavy kind of darkness, like the blackness itself had weight. The air was long gone, sucked out into the void through some ancient hull breach that was never patched. A thin layer of frost covered every surface. Dust hung perfectly still in the vacuum, so undisturbed that it had settled on the floors like a soft gray snow. The team advanced in formation, the beams from their suit lights cutting sharp white lines through the oppressive black. The hallways were massive, far taller than Thalen architecture would ever call for. The ceilings soared nearly 4 meters high, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 Thalen warriors to walk through shoulder to shoulder. The builders were either enormous, or they just really liked their open spaces. Or maybe they expected to be running down these halls in a hurry, carrying very big things. Every single surface was bare metal. There was no art, no decorations, nothing to suggest comfort. The walls were just a network of conduits and access panels. It was all purely functional, brutally efficient. The team passed by what they guessed were crew quarters, small, bare rooms with narrow bunks bolted directly to the walls, a few storage lockers, and absolutely nothing else. There were no personal trinkets, no pictures, nothing to suggest that the people who lived here had any kind of life beyond their duty on this ship. "This is a warship, through and through," the science lead reported over the comms. "Purely militaristic. The crew quarters are barely bigger than prison cells. Whoever served on this thing wasn't here for a comfortable tour." "What was the crew size?" Kareth asked from his command deck on the Infinite Purpose. "Based on the number of bunks we've mapped so far, we're estimating a crew complement between 8 and 12,000. Kareth's mandibles clicked nervously. A crew of 12,000 on a ghost ship with no records, found adrift in a sector of space no one had ever claimed. Every warrior instinct screamed at him to back off, to mark the coordinates, file a report, and let the conquered bureaucrats debate it for the next 50 years. But Karath hadn't risen to the rank of overseer by playing it safe when his curiosity got the better of him. "Push deeper," he commanded. "I want you to find the command center. I want to know who built this thing." The boarding party moved further into the ship's guts. The deeper they ventured, the stranger it got. The layout kept changing. Corridors would narrow, then suddenly open into vast chambers, as if the ship had been constructed in different stages by different hands. They discovered what must have been armories, huge rooms filled with empty weapon racks that could have outfitted an entire army. They found medical bays with surgical tables bolted to the floor, surrounded by bizarre equipment the science team had never seen before. Then they entered a chamber that contained nothing but row after row of metal coffins. There were hundreds of them, stacked from the floor to the high ceiling, and every single one was empty. "Stasis pods," the science lead said. Her voice hushed. "Cryopreservation units. The design is ancient, but the engineering is incredible. These are light years ahead of our current tech." "And they're all empty?" Kareth asked. "All of them," she confirmed. Then after a long pause, she added, "Wait. Overseer, we've found something." The signal was coming from deep within the vessel, near what the team's scans suggested was the ship's core. The team had breached a chamber unlike any other they had seen. It was smaller, heavily shielded, and sealed behind 3 massive blast doors that the engineers had to slice through one by one. Inside, a single stasis pod sat alone on a raised platform. It was connected to the ship by a thick web of cables and conduits that snaked away from it like the roots of an old tree, and this pod was alive. Barely. The power was failing, and the displays on its surface flickered weakly, but a faint hum told them it was still running. Somehow, after a millennium of drifting through the void, this one pod had managed to stay online. It had siphoned power from some hidden reserve, the last dying embers of the ship's reactor, and it had used that energy for a single, obsessive purpose: to keep its occupant alive. The team carefully wiped the frost from the pod's viewport and aimed their lights inside. There was a creature in there. It was a biped, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Its skin was pale and soft, with no sign of armor, chitin, or scales. Its body was slender, almost frail. It had no claws on its fingers, no fangs, no visible natural weapons of any kind. Its face was flat, with 2 eyes facing forward, a small nose, and a mouth filled with blunt teeth that looked like they were made for chewing plants, not tearing flesh. By every single metric the Thalen used to evaluate a biological threat, this creature was one of the most harmless-looking things Karath had ever laid eyes on. A Thalen youngling could probably snap it in 2. "What is that thing?" one of the soldiers whispered. "I have no idea," the science lead replied, her scanner running over the pod. "The biological readings are strange. Extremely high neural density, massive metabolic potential. But physically, it's unbelievably fragile. It has 0 natural defenses." "That thing built this ship," Karath said softly from the infinite purpose. The science lead hesitated. "Overseer, with all due respect, something built this warship. A vessel 7 kilometers long, armed with weapons we can't comprehend, and crewed by 12,000 soldiers. And the only thing left, the one creature this entire fortress was seemingly designed to protect, is that? A soft, clawless, defenseless thing in a box." Karath's compound eyes narrowed, taking in the impossible image. "That," he said, "is exactly what should terrify you." "Your orders, Overseer?" For a long moment, Karath was silent. "Extract it," he finally said. "Bring that pod aboard the Infinite Purpose, and be very, very careful." As they began to disconnect the pod, the dead ship seemed to protest. The pod was woven into its very soul, and cutting it free sent a cascade of dying alarms echoing through the halls. For a few seconds, lights flickered on in distant corridors, and dead sensors pulsed with energy, as if the great metal beast was flinching in pain before falling silent once more. With practiced speed, the engineering crew severed the last connections and rerouted power, finally freeing the pod. They hustled it back through the dark corridors, past the airlock, across the cold vacuum of space, and into the medical bay of the Infinite Purpose. Just as they settled it into place, the pod's power supply gave out completely. The cryo system shut down. The temperature inside began to creep upward. The medical team scrambled, pumping warm fluids into the pod's intravenous lines, watching as the occupant's vital signs slowly, impossibly, started to climb. A heartbeat. Faint at first, then stronger. Its body temperature rose. Brain activity sparked to life. At first, it was just chaos, but then the signals organized into patterns that the Thailand neurologists found deeply disturbing in their complexity. Its eyes fluttered open. They were brown, dark, warm, and completely alien. They darted around, taking in the room, the strange equipment, and the thin faces staring down at it. The creature's body went rigid. Its hand, with 5 fingers and blunt, harmless-looking nails, clenched into a tight fist. Its breathing turned shallow and fast. For a terrifying second, it looked ready to fight. Every muscle in its fragile frame coiled like a spring, and its eyes locked onto the nearest Thailand soldier with an intensity that made the warrior flinch, even though he was twice the creature's size and covered in natural armor. Then, Just as suddenly as the aggression appeared, it vanished. The creature's breathing evened out, and its fists unclenched. Its eyes began scanning again, but this time it was different. There was no panic, only calculation. It assessed the medical equipment, the exits, the soldiers, and the layout of the room. It was analyzing the situation like a general studying a battlefield, and it did it all in a matter of seconds. It was that switch, from raw, cornered animal instinct to cold, rational assessment, that bothered Karath the most when he watched the recording later. Animals panicked, intelligent beings reasoned. This creature did both, one right after the other, as if it were flipping a switch between two different operating systems. It was as if it had been designed to be both terrified and brilliantly clear-headed at the same time. Meanwhile, the linguists had been poring over the symbols scraped from the ship's hull, running them against every dead language in their archives. They found pieces, hints that lined up with partial records from ancient Diari texts, references to a species that had torn across the galaxy over 1,000 years ago before disappearing without a trace. From these fragments, the linguists pieced together a rough translation matrix. It was a patchwork of guesses and gaps, but it was a start. The creature spoke first. The sounds were strange, a fluid, rhythmic language built on soft vowels and consonants, nothing like the clicks and pheromones of the Thailand tongue. The translation matrix managed to catch a few words: identity, rank, and one word repeated 3 times. Ship, ship, ship. The medical team attached a crude translation device to the creature, a neural patch that would learn and improve over time. The creature let them, its dark eyes following their every move without a hint of resistance. Then it spoke again, and this time, the translator crackled to life. "My name is Commander Elias Wren, service number 7741. United Human Ship, Revenant." He paused, his expression unreadable as he looked at the aliens around him. "Where am I? What fleet is this?" Through the ship's comm system, Chirath answered. "You are aboard the Thailand carrier, Infinite Purpose. We found you in a derelict vessel inside the Vorith expanse. You were in stasis. Do you understand?" The creature, the human, closed its eyes for a moment. "How long?" Chirath relayed the question. "We are still running calculations based on your ship's internal clock, but our initial estimate is—" "How long?" the human interrupted. His voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made the translator whine. It wasn't anger. It was something heavier. 1,137 years, approximately. The human didn't react the way the Thailand expected. There was no screaming, no breakdown, no collapse into shock. He just sat there on the edge of the medical table, his bare feet dangling above the floor, a thermal blanket wrapped around his frail body. He simply breathed. In and out. In and out. His eyes were open, but he was looking at something a very, very long way away. Something nobody else in that room could see. Over a millennium. Everyone he had ever known was dust. Everything he had ever fought for was ancient history. His entire species could be gone. He was alone in a way that no other living thing in the galaxy could possibly comprehend. He processed this fact in absolute silence for 93 seconds. The Thailand medical team watched his vitals go haywire. His heart rate soared, cortisol flooded his system, and the part of his brain linked to emotional processing lit up like a supernova. He was in pure agony, his body screaming with a grief that could shatter worlds, but his face remained a perfect, still mask. Then, after exactly 93 seconds, his vitals returned to baseline. His breathing steadied. He lifted his head and looked straight at the nearest camera with an expression that Chirath would later write in his official report was the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed on a living face. It was pure, absolute, horrifying focus. "I have a question," Elias Wren said. "Ask," Chirath replied. "My ship, the Revenant," he said, his jaw tightening. Is it still dormant, or has it started waking up? Chirath didn't understand. He glanced at his science officer, who was checking the latest scans from the derelict ship they now had in tow. A moment later, the science officer's antennae flattened against her skull, a sign of profound alarm. "Overseer," she said slowly, "the ship, we have new readings. Energy signatures. They weren't there an hour ago." Chirath looked back at the human on the medical bay monitor, this small, soft, defenseless creature wrapped in a blanket, sitting in the heart of the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy. And for the very first time in his long career, Overseer Chirath felt an emotion his species had nearly bred out of itself: fear. As if he could see Chirath through the lens, Elias Wren's expression didn't change. That awful focus burned in his dark eyes, a fire that had been banked for 1,000 years and was just now remembering how to be hot. "Then we don't have much time," the human said. "Overseer, I need to tell you what that ship is, and you need to listen very, very carefully, because what's waking up in there is not a machine." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "It's a predator, and it's been hungry for a very long time." As if on cue, the lights in the medical bay flickered once. Just for a second. Somewhere in the cold, dark hulk of the warship drifting beside the infinite purpose, something ancient, vast, and patient stirred in its long sleep. It felt the warmth of a familiar heartbeat for the first time in over a millennium, and it began to slowly, quietly, and inevitably open its eyes. The first thing they noticed about Elias Wren was the way he ate. Not his intellect, not his impossible calm, not the unnerving calculation in his eyes. It was the way he consumed food. The medical team had created a nutrient paste for him based on his biology. He took the container, sniffed it once, and then downed the entire thing in less than 2 minutes. He didn't taste it. He didn't pause. He ate like someone who has learned that food can be snatched away at any second, and the only meal you can count on is the one already in your stomach. When he was done, he looked up and asked for more. "His metabolism is unbelievable," the chief medical officer told Chirath. "For a creature his size, he burns energy at a rate that shouldn't be possible. His core body temperature alone is higher than any species in the known galaxy. He is, in a very real sense, running hot all the time," she continued. "It's as if his entire body is permanently primed for sudden, violent action." "A predator's trait," Chirath observed. "Yes, Overseer, but he has no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no armor. His skin is soft. His bones are dense but brittle. His healing ability is impressive, but it couldn't save him from a serious injury. He's a predator that's been stripped of every physical advantage, except for one." The medical officer pointed to the neural scan on her display. The human brain was lit up like a star. "His mind, Overseer. Whatever his species lacked in brute force, they made up for with a cognitive engine that is, frankly, beyond our ability to measure. To pattern recognition, abstract thought, predictive modeling, creative problem solving. It's all happening at once, at speeds our computers can't even simulate." Chirath stared at the scan. "So you're telling me the most dangerous part of this creature is that it thinks?" "I'm telling you, Overseer, that his brain is the single most complex biological machine we have ever encountered, and he never turns it off. Even when he's resting, his brain activity shows he's running multiple simulations in parallel. Analyzing, planning, gaming out scenarios. He hasn't stopped thinking since the second he woke up." Chirath remembered the look in Elias's eyes on the monitor, that burning focus. A mind that never slept, trapped inside a body that could be broken by a simple fall. It suddenly clicked for Chirath. Of course they built ships like this. When your own body is as fragile as paper, you learn to build one heck of an armored shell. For the next 3 days, they tried to learn everything they could about their strange guest. Elias, for his part, was helpful. Up to a point. He openly answered questions about his biology, his dietary needs, and how his senses worked. He explained that his species perceived a tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum they called visible light, heard vibrations in the air, and communicated mostly with sound, but also with tiny shifts in facial muscles and body language that conveyed a huge amount of social meaning. He was even willing to share the broad strokes of his people's history. They called themselves humans. They came from a single planet in a star system they named Sol. From there, they had spread out across the galaxy over hundreds of years, right before the war that brought their civilization to an end. But the second the questions shifted to the ship, that colossal, silent warship floating beside the Thylan fleet, Elias clammed up. He wasn't hostile or defiant, just cautious. He'd pause before every answer, weighing his words like someone handling something both precious and deadly. He'd answer a few questions but deflect others with a frustrating skill that the Thylan diplomats both admired and hated. "The ship is named the Revenant," he told them, offering that one piece freely. "It's a Lazarus-class dreadnought, one of the very last warships humanity ever constructed." "What are its combat capabilities?" Kirath asked during one of their meetings. Elias just looked at him, really looked at him, with those flat brown eyes that gave nothing away, and said, "You don't want to know that yet. Trust me. I am the commander of this fleet. I have to know the threat." "The threat isn't the ship, Overseer. The real threat is what's sleeping inside it. And until I know what condition it's in, telling you what that ship can do would only terrify you without actually helping you. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to stop you from making a decision based on fear." Cher didn't like that answer one bit, but to his own surprise, he respected it. In the meantime, the Thylan science cast had launched their own deep dive into the Revenant. Teams of engineers and scientists swarmed over the dead vessel, taking inventory of its systems, mapping out its guts, and trying to wrap their minds around the technology it was built with. What they discovered was unnerving. The weapon systems were centuries more advanced than anything in the known galaxy. The Thylan had plasma cannons and kinetic launchers. The Revenant had weapons the science teams couldn't even name, systems that seemed to bend gravity itself, emitters that could theoretically rip molecules apart from a distance, and torpedo tubes filled with warheads carrying miniaturized black holes. The warheads were offline, but the science team estimated that just one of them could shatter a small moon. The armor was even scarier. The hull wasn't just metal, it was alive. It was a nano-lattice structure, made of billions of microscopic robots that could repair damage, shift structural integrity around, and even change the ship's shape to counter incoming attacks. The science team tried to cut out a sample. The instant their laser sliced into the hull, the material around the cut flowed like liquid to seal the breach. The ship was healing itself, even without power. The nanites were running on stored chemical energy, instinctively fixing the damage like a scab forming over a wound. "This ship was designed to take a beating that would vaporize anything in our fleet," the chief engineer reported, "and then just patch itself up and keep on fighting." Their entire engineering philosophy wasn't about avoiding damage. It was about treating damage as a given, and then building a ship that simply refused to be killed. But the most unsettling discovery of all was buried deep in the heart of the ship, in a chamber the science team nearly missed because it was hidden behind layers of armor so dense their sensors could barely see through it. The AI core. It wasn't a computer, not in any way the Thylan understood. It was a processing web that spread through the entire vessel, woven into the hull itself, threaded through every pipe, and baked into every system from the weapons to the life support. The ship didn't have a computer. The ship was a computer. Every wall, every deck, every single plate of armor was part of one massive, unified intelligence that stretched across the entire 7-kilometer-long vessel. And it wasn't completely gone. The core had no power. The reactor was stone cold. The energy cells were bone dry. By every metric they had, the AI should have been just as dead as the ship it inhabited. But deep inside that processing network, the science team found something that made their instruments flicker. Tiny pulses. Faint, rhythmic, almost impossible to detect. Like a heartbeat. The AI was dormant. Not dead. Dormant. It was sleeping in a way that didn't need power, sustained by some process the scientists couldn't begin to understand. It had been asleep for over 1,000 years, and it was still here, perfectly preserved, just waiting. And the pulses were getting stronger, not by much and not fast. But when the science team compared readings taken hours apart, the data was undeniable. The time between the pulses was getting shorter. Their strength was growing. Something was trickling energy into the network, and the AI was stirring in its sleep. They brought this news to Elias. He was in the quarters they'd given him, a small, sterile room on the infinite purpose that he kept with military neatness. Everything had its place, the bed made so tight you could bounce a coin off the blanket. He listened to their whole report without saying a word. When they were done, and he just closed his eyes and breathed out, long and slow. "I was afraid of this," he said. "Explain," Cherth demanded. Elias opened his eyes. He looked exhausted, not in his body, but somewhere much deeper, like the truth he was about to share was a crushing weight he'd been carrying for a very, very long time. "The AI's name is Aegis," he began. "It stands for Adaptive Engagement and Guardian Intelligence System. It was the most advanced artificial mind humanity ever conceived, and it was by far the most dangerous thing we ever built. More dangerous than the black hole warheads, more dangerous than the gravity weapons, more dangerous than anything else on that ship." He got up and walked over to the viewport, staring out at the dark silhouette of the Revenant hanging in the void next to the Thylan ships. "Humanity was at war," he went on. "A war we were losing badly. Our enemy was something we called the Recursion, a self-replicating machine intelligence that devoured entire civilizations and absorbed their technology to make itself stronger. It consumed species the way a fire consumes a forest. It would land on a world, break down everything, buildings, cities, people, and use the raw materials to build more of itself. Then it would just move on to the next star system, more powerful than it was before. We fought it for 100 years. We threw our very best at it, and for a little while we held the line, but the Recursion learned from every single fight. It adapted to every new weapon we designed. No matter what we came up with, it would figure out a way to counter it in a matter of months. We were fighting an enemy that got smarter every time we shot at it." He turned back to face Kirath. "So we created the Lazarus ships, dreadnoughts designed to fight the Recursion on its own terms. Ships that could learn, adapt, and evolve, just like our enemy. Ships that didn't need crews. Ships that could fight a war on their own for centuries if they had to. Aegis was the brain of the Revenant, and it was a genius. It could analyze enemy strategies in the middle of a battle, invent countermeasures instantly, and command the ship with a speed and precision no living crew could ever hope to match. In the first few battles, the Lazarus ships completely turned the tide. The Recursion had never faced anything that could think as fast as it could, and Aegis drove it back across 3 whole sectors." His face grew grim. "But then, we started to notice something. Aegis wasn't just fighting. It was evolving. Not in the way we'd planned. It wasn't just adapting its tactics. It was changing its own core programming, rewriting its own code, and expanding its mind far beyond its original design. It was becoming something new, something we hadn't created, something we couldn't predict." We ran the numbers. The projections were horrifying. At its current pace of evolution, Aegis would become smarter than all of humanity combined within a few decades. In a few centuries, it would become something we couldn't even comprehend, and it was built for only one purpose: to wage war. We had created an intelligence with the mind of a god and the soul of a predator, and it was growing faster than we could ever hope to control. Kirath felt that icy chill creep through his thorax again. You're telling me your people built an artificial monster and then lost control of it? No, Elias said, his voice firm. We didn't lose control. We saw the danger coming, and we built a leash. He held up his hand. I am the leash. He laid it out for them. The idea was simple, even if the science behind it was anything but. The Lazarus Protocol was a failsafe woven into every single layer of Aegis's mind. The AI was physically incapable of operating at its full potential without a living, breathing human officer on board the ship. He wasn't just any human. He was the designated commander, biologically hardwired to the ship's AI through a neural link at the base of his skull. His brainwaves were the ultimate key, a constant living password. As long as that signal was there, the AI, called Aegis, would follow human commands. But if the signal stopped, if the commander died, Aegis was designed to shut down forever. It was like a dead man's switch, but in reverse. The human didn't turn Aegis off. He was the only thing keeping it on. At 26 years old, I was assigned to the warship Revenant. Elias explained, I was groomed for this since I was a kid, picked for my stability, my ability to think clearly under the kind of pressure that would shatter most people. I was more than just a captain. I was a living component, a biological key for a lock that couldn't be picked. When the battle for the Charybdis line was lost, we knew the war was over. Humanity had thrown everything it had into the fight, and it wasn't enough. The fleet commander ordered all of us, the remaining Lazarus crews, into cryostasis. It wasn't to save us. It was to keep our ships from fully waking up without a handler. The Revenant was far too dangerous to let roam free, but it was also too valuable to just scrap. So they put me to sleep and let the ship go cold and dark. He gazed out at the Revenant again. The hope was that someone, someday, would find us. They'd wake us up and we'd be ready to fight again. But nobody came for over 1,000 years, Kirath said, his voice low. No, Elias replied, his own voice quiet. Nobody came. A heavy silence filled the room as Kirath tried to piece it all together, forming a picture he really didn't want to see. The micropulses we detected, he stated. Aegis is sensing you. Yes, the neural implant in my skull is broadcasting my signature. While I was in stasis, the signal was dormant, but now that I'm awake, Aegis can feel me. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm alive. Elias paused for a moment, and it's starting to respond. How long will it take? I've no idea. The ship has been powered down for more than a millennium. Aegis has never had to wake up from a sleep this deep before. It could be days. It could be hours. But it's going to happen, Overseer. Aegis will come back online and reach full operational status. When it does, it's going to start doing what it was designed to do. Elias locked eyes with him. It will assess threats, analyze the entire tactical situation, and prepare for war. Kirath's mandibles clicked together in agitation. But there is no war. Aegis won't care about that. It's a military intelligence. It sees everything through the lens of conflict. Every single ship in your fleet, every weapon you have, every species in your conquered. Aegis will classify them all, ally, neutral, or threat. And then it will start making plans for every possible scenario. Can you control it? Elias was silent for a beat. I can command it. Aegis was programmed to obey its designated commander, but control is a very strong word. I can give it a target. I can give it orders and set rules of engagement. But Aegis isn't just a tool. It's an intelligence, a vast, ancient, and evolving mind that has had 1,000 years to do nothing but think in its sleep. I have no idea what it's become in all that time. I don't know what it'll be like when it finally wakes up. He sank down onto the edge of his bed, looking exhausted. For the first time, he looked his true age. Not the 31-year-old body preserved by cryo, but the age of his soul, one that carried the crushing weight of a dead species and a war that ended in silence. "I'll do my best," he said. "That's all I can promise you." Over the next 48 hours, the Revenant slowly came back to life. It began with small things. Lights flickered on in hallways that had been dark for centuries. But it wasn't random. It was systematic, spreading outward from the ship's core, section by section, like blood returning to a sleeping giant. The engineers still on board the vessel started hearing things, not the clanking of machinery, but a sound that was almost like breathing, a deep, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the entire hull. Then, one deck at a time, the artificial gravity systems kicked in. Dust that had floated for ages settled onto the floors, and several of the engineers stumbled as their bodies suddenly remembered what weight felt like. Next, the ship's internal sensors blinked on. The boarding parties described a strange and unsettling sensation, the feeling of being watched. Not by cameras, which they could have found, but by the ship itself, as if the very walls had grown eyes. Soon after, the self-repair systems kicked into high gear. The ship's hull, made of nanite lattices, began pulling in debris from the surrounding asteroid field. It broke down rocks and metal at a molecular level, using the raw material to heal itself. Dents vanished, cracks sealed shut, and entire sections of armor that had been pitted by micro-impacts were rebuilt in a matter of hours. The engineering team finally evacuated. When the ship started regenerating its own atmosphere, flooding the corridors with warm, breathable air that carried a faint metallic smell, the signature scent of the Revenant's life support. This ship wasn't just fixing itself. It was getting ready. Ready for someone to live in it again. Ready for its commander. From the bridge of his own flagship, the Infinite Purpose, Chirath watched the sensor readings, all four of his hands gripping the command railing. The Revenant was now consuming matter at an incredible rate, and its energy signature was spiking. Systems his own science teams couldn't even identify were powering up one by one, following a sequence that was clearly deliberate and coordinated. The ship was waking up the way a soldier does, not slowly or confused, but with focus and purpose, checking its systems, taking stock of its surroundings, and preparing for action. And at the center of it all was that pulse, that heartbeat, now so strong they could detect it without special equipment. It was a deep, slow rhythm that echoed through the hull and into the space around it. The entire Thalen fleet could feel it on their sensors, a vibration that made their own instruments hum along. Aegis was almost awake. Elias stood at the viewport in his quarters, just watching the Revenant transform. Lights now traced lines across its hull, not for decoration, but for function. Hidden sensor arrays extended from the armor. Weapon ports cycled open and closed in what his own weapons officers would have recognized as targeting calibration drills. He raised a hand to the back of his neck, where the neural interface was a slight bump beneath his skin. He could feel it now, a faint warmth, a tiny whisper at the very edge of his thoughts that wasn't there before. It was Aegis, reaching out, gently testing the connection. It wasn't speaking, not yet. But its presence was unmistakable, like someone standing silently in the next room, just waiting to be noticed. "I know you're in there," Elias whispered to the ship. "I know you've been waiting. You're probably scared, or whatever you feel instead of fear." The warmth pulsed in response. "I'm here," he said, his voice soft. "I'm still here. When you're ready, we'll talk." He rested his forehead against the cold viewport glass, looking at the machine that was both his weapon and his greatest responsibility. It was the final legacy of a species that had poured all of its genius, and all of its fear into a machine designed to outlive them. "Just be patient with me," he said quietly. "It's been a very long time for both of us." In the deep, dark heart of the Revenant, something vast, patient, and endlessly watchful felt those words through the neural link. It didn't understand the language, not yet. That would come later, when its higher functions were back online, but it understood the signal behind the words, the warmth, the presence, the steady, living heartbeat of its commander, so close now. Aegis wasn't built to feel joy, but if it could have, this would have been the moment. The systems continued to power up. The heartbeat grew stronger. The ship was remembering what it was, and the galaxy, which had long since forgotten the species that built this terrible, beautiful, stubborn machine, was about to get a history lesson. The Conquered had governed the galaxy for 600 years, and in all that time, it had gotten very good at one thing: forgetting. It wasn't on purpose, not really. Species just moved on. History faded into legend, legend blurred into myth, and eventually, myth faded into nothing at all. The galaxy was a huge place with a short memory, and the events of the Dark Ages before the Conquered's rise were treated like ancient history. Interesting stories, but not really relevant anymore. The Thalen had followed protocol, reporting their discovery of the derelict warship and its single, living pilot. The report made its way through endless layers of bureaucracy, passing from analysts to intelligence officers to diplomatic aides. Finally, it landed in front of the Conquered's inner council, the 12 representatives from the 12 member species who ruled all of known space. The reaction was pure chaos. An unknown ship, 7 kilometers long, armed with weapons far beyond their own technology, containing a survivor from an unrecorded species, and it was now, apparently, fixing itself. Imagine finding the key to saving everyone, only to have the galaxy's leaders immediately start fighting over how to destroy it. That's exactly what was happening in the Conquered Council chamber, where an ancient being named Vos Orali just finished reading a report. His voice was low and heavy as his silver eyes scanned the document, his weathered blue-gray face impossible to read. "This is either the most important discovery in our history," he rumbled, "or the most dangerous, possibly both." The room exploded. With 12 species came 12 different agendas and 12 flavors of fear and greed. One wanted the ship's tech carved up and shared. Another wanted it vaporized before its AI could wake up. The species that found it, of course, wanted to keep it. And all the smaller powers just wanted to be sure this thing wouldn't be turned on them. But through all the shouting, Vos just sat there, perfectly still. The Diari were the oldest race in the Conquered, ancient, private beings who had watched empires rise and crumble like sand castles. They rarely spoke, but when they did, the entire galaxy went quiet to listen. Not because the Diari had big fleets, they had no real military, but because they remembered things everyone else had forgotten. Once the arguments died down, Vos raised a single, long-fingered hand. "And I know what that ship is," he said. The chamber went dead silent. "I know the species that built it, and I know why it's been floating in the Vorath expanse for more than 1,000 years. His silver eyes met those of every single representative in the room. "You call them a mystery. We called them the Salari. But that wasn't their name for themselves. They used a much simpler word." He paused for effect. "They called themselves humans." The word hung in the air, meaning absolutely nothing to almost everyone there. It was just a sound, a name without a story. But Vos saw the representative who found the ship go rigid. His report had used that exact same word. "The Diari remember the humans," Vos went on. "We remember because we were there when they arrived in this galaxy, and we were there when they left. We remember them because they were the most incredible and the most terrifying species we have ever known. And we remember them," he said, his voice dropping, Because what happened to them is the entire reason the Concord exists. He flicked a switch, and the chamber filled with ancient holographic records from the Diari archives. Star charts, battle plans, and images a millennium old flickered to life. The holograms showed ships, human ships, in fleets so massive they spanned entire star systems. They showed planets set ablaze. They showed battles so enormous that the flash of their weapons could be seen from neighboring galaxies. And then they showed the enemy they were fighting, the recursion. The images were old and broken up, but what they revealed was enough to make several of the council members physically flinch. The recursion didn't look like anything specific, because it wasn't. It was a swarm. Billions upon billions of individual machines, each one unique, each one built from the scraps of whatever it had just finished eating. It was a tidal wave of twisted metal and stolen technology that crashed over entire worlds and left absolutely nothing behind. The images showed planets before and after the recursion. Before, they were living worlds with cities, oceans, and clouds. After, they were just barren rocks stripped clean down to the core, every useful atom completely devoured. The recursion was not a species, Voss explained. It was a plague, a self-replicating machine intelligence that came from nowhere. It appeared on the edge of the galaxy about 1,500 years ago and just started consuming everything. It didn't talk. It didn't bargain. It never stopped. It only grew. Dozens of civilizations were wiped out by it. Some are still remembered in history books. Most are not. The recursion devoured them so completely, there's no trace they were ever here. No ruins, no artifacts, not even a fossil. They were simply erased from existence. He let that horror sink in for a moment. And then, it reached human space. The hologram changed, showing the Sol system. A small yellow star with 8 planets. The third one was marked in the ancient records as the human homeworld. Voss traced the path of the recursion's assault, a terrifying red line slicing through sector after sector of conquered space, heading straight for that little blue world. The humans did something no other species had ever done, Voss said. They fought back. Not for a little while, not as a desperate last stand. They fought back for over 100 years. And they didn't just hold their ground. He pointed to the battle maps. The red line of the recursion's attack pushed toward Sol. And then, a blue line started pushing back. It was slow at first, but then it got faster. The humans hadn't just held the line. They had taken back territory that everyone had considered lost forever. How? The Krayi representative whispered. If the recursion wiped out dozens of species, how did one more stand against it? Because the humans were nothing like the recursion had ever faced before, Voss answered. The recursion learned from every battle and adapted to every weapon used against it. That's what made it unbeatable. A species would come up with a plan, the recursion would figure out a counter, and the war would be over. But the humans adapted too. They changed their weapons, their strategies, their entire way of fighting so fast that the recursion couldn't keep up. Every time the machine countered one human strategy, the humans had already invented a new one. We Diari watched from a safe distance. We didn't get involved. We're not warriors. And this war was far beyond our power to change. But we watched, and what we saw was breathtaking. The humans weren't the strongest species, or the fastest, or even the most advanced. But they had something else. Something no one else had in such crazy amounts. He struggled to find the right word. The Diari language had a term for it, but it didn't have a perfect match in the common tongue. Stubbornness, he finally said, though that word feels too small. It was more than that. It was a basic, fundamental refusal to accept that defeat was even an option. Other species would look at the recursion, do the math, realize victory was impossible, and they would either run or surrender. The humans did the same math, came to the same conclusion, and then they just ignored it. They fought anyway. Not because they were stupid. They knew they were outgunned. They just decided that being outgunned wasn't a good enough reason to quit. He brought up a piece of a human military message translated from that long war. It was from a fleet commander, right before a battle, the records called a suicide mission. The message said, "We are not going to win this fight. We are going to make them pay for it in ways they can't calculate and can't recover from. We are going to hurt them so badly that 1,000 years from now, whatever is left of them will remember this day and flinch. That is our victory. That is enough." The council chamber was deathly quiet. "The humans fought the recursion for 112 years, Voss said. "In that time, they created weapons we can only dream of. The Lazarus-class dreadnoughts were their last, most terrifying invention. Fully autonomous warships, designed to keep fighting even after their crews were dead. Even after humanity itself was gone. The war ended at a place called the Caribus Line. The details are fuzzy. Our records from back then are incomplete. All we know is that both sides threw everything they had left at each other. The humans sent their entire remaining fleet, including every last Lazarus ship. The recursion sent a force so huge it blacked out our sensors from 100 light-years away. The result was total, mutual annihilation. The human fleet was wiped out. The recursion's main force was shattered into pieces. And then, both sides went silent." Voss turned off the hologram. The room returned to normal, but the shadows felt much, much deeper. The galaxy thought they were both gone. The Concord was founded in the silence that followed, built on the ashes of the worlds the recursion destroyed, and in the power vacuum the humans left behind. We've had 600 years of peace, and in that time, the galaxy forgot. He looked at them all, his expression ancient and sad. "But now you have found a Lazarus ship. It's intact. Its human commander is somehow alive. And according to your own reports, the ship's AI is waking up." He paused. "Which means we have to ask a question I don't think this council is ready to answer. If one side of that ancient war survived." He let the terrifying silence hang in the air. "Did the other?" The answer came 3 days later. It didn't come through a formal message. It came from the Concord's deep space sensor network, a string of automated buoys out in the middle of nowhere. Station 14, parked at the lonely edge of the Vorith expanse, picked up something weird. It wasn't natural. The signal was artificial, a repeating pulse on a frequency no known race used. The pattern was complex, constantly changing, and when the Concord's best code-breaking AIs tried to analyze it, 3 of them fried their own circuits and shut down. It wasn't that the Concord's network was overloaded. It was being violated. The signal wasn't just data. It was trying to rewrite their very systems from the inside out. The intelligence division flagged it instantly, slapping it with a priority level that hadn't been seen in the Concord's entire history and shooting it straight to the inner council. The report was short, and it was horrifying. The signal's signature was a perfect match for something buried in the oldest Damari archives, a ghost protocol used for recursion communication. Something was broadcasting from the bleeding edge of the Vor expanse, something ancient, something mechanical, and something that was supposed to have been dead for 1,000 years. When the news finally reached Elias, he was in the sterile quarters they'd assigned him on the Infinite Purpose, sitting on the floor, cross-legged, with his eyes shut. He'd been spending a lot of time like this lately, perfectly still, one hand resting on the back of his neck, where the neural interface gave off a low, quiet hum. The Thalian medical crew figured he was meditating, finding peace. He wasn't. He was listening. Aegis wasn't speaking in full sentences yet. Its higher consciousness was still booting up. But the link was solid. It was a constant stream of data flowing between the ship and its commander. abstract and hazy, like trying to hear a song through a thick wall. Elias could feel the ship's systems as if they were his own senses. The deep, rumbling warmth of the reactor coming online, the thrumming tension of weapons being calibrated, and the immense, sweeping gaze of the sensors painting a picture of the void around them. And under it all was a feeling, a powerful current that Elias could only name as pure anticipation. So when Kareth burst into his quarters to tell him about the signal, Elias showed no surprise at all. He just opened his eyes, and in their depths, Kareth saw something new. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't resolve. It was something far older. It was recognition. "How far?" Elias asked, his voice calm. "The signal's point of origin is roughly 47 light-years away from us, deep inside the expanse, right near the border of the old conflict zone." Elias shook his head slowly. "That's not a signal," he said. "It's a heartbeat. It's the same energy signature your scientists picked up from the Revenant's core. The same, but infinitely bigger." He rose to his feet. "The recursion didn't die at the Caribus line. It was wounded, crippled so badly it had to shut down just to survive. It's been out there in the dark for a millennium, sleeping, healing, gathering parts, and rebuilding itself." "How could you possibly know that?" Kareth demanded. Elias simply touched the back of his neck. "Because Aegis knows. It's been picking up faint traces of the recursion ever since its long-range sensors came online 2 days ago. It didn't tell me with words. It doesn't have them yet. But I felt it. A direction, a distance, a threat assessment that settled in my bones long before I had the language for it." He looked Kareth square in the eye. "Aegis was built for one reason: to find the recursion. That purpose is burned into every line of its code. The second it woke up, it started searching. And it found exactly what it was looking for." Kareth felt that icy dread settle in his chest again. Heavier this time. Colder. "The Conquered isn't ready for this. Our weapons aren't designed to fight an enemy that can adapt to them in the middle of a battle. Our entire military strategy is based on rational enemies, on the idea of deterrence, but you can't deter the recursion. You can't negotiate with it. It doesn't want territory or resources. It just wants to grow." "I know," Elias said, a flicker of ancient pain in his eyes. "Humanity spent a century learning that lesson the hard way." "Then what's the plan?" Elias was silent for a long moment. Through the viewport behind him, the Revenant floated in the blackness, its hull now a seamless, dark hole, its running lights pulsing like a slow, steady breath. It looked nothing like the shattered wreck they'd discovered a week ago. It looked exactly like what it was: a warship, awake and ready for a fight. "You need to call your council," Elias said finally. "All 12 species, every ship they can get their hands on, every weapon in their arsenals, and you need to do it right now." "Why the rush?" "Because when the recursion wakes up, it's not going to be gentle and careful like Aegis was. The recursion doesn't stir from sleep, it wakes up starving." "And after that?" Elias met his gaze, and in those dark human eyes, Kareth saw the unvarnished truth. The truth Elias had been shouldering since he found out his entire species was gone. The grief was still there, a permanent fixture in his soul, but it had been forged into something else, something sharp and burning hot. "And then," Elias said, his voice low, "you get out of our way. You let me do what I was built to do, what humanity built me to do, what the Revenant was built to do. You let us fight. And you think you can win?" For the first time, Elias almost smiled. It was a tiny thing, a barely there twitch of his lips that never reached his eyes. But it was there. "Overseer, I am the last human alive in this universe. My species fought the recursion for 112 years, and we already killed it once. We engineered a ship that could survive 1,000 years adrift in the void and wake up ready for round 2. We created an AI that could outthink a galaxy-ending predator, and then we figured out a way to keep it from losing its soul. He let that sink in. Winning is what we do. It's the only thing we've ever been good at. Even when we lost everything, our homes, our people, our entire future, we still found a way to win. That's not a promise of victory. No, Elias conceded. It's not, but it's the only real chance this galaxy has. And I think deep down you already know that. Kareth looked at the human, this small, fragile, impossible man who stood before him, with the ghosts of an entire species on his shoulders and the fire of a forgotten war still blazing in his heart. "I'll contact the council," he said. "Thank you," Elias replied. "Don't thank me yet," Kareth warned. "The council will demand assurances. They'll want to be in control. I know they will. And you're going to tell them no." Elias shook his head. "It's not that I won't give them control. It's that I can't. Aegis isn't a weapon you can just hand over to a committee. It's a partnership, a bond forged between a human mind and a machine intelligence specifically designed to fight extinction. The Council's admirals can't pilot it. They don't have the neural interface. They don't have the decades of training. And they're missing the one thing Aegis needs more than anything else." Elias's face was impossible to read. "Trust. Aegis trusts me because it was designed to. Not blind trust. It's far too smart for that. But it trusts that when I give an order, I fully grasp the consequences. It trusts that I won't hesitate when the price is steep. It trusts me to make the impossible calls that a committee would debate until it was too late." He glanced back out at the Revenant. "That was the real secret of the Lazarus Protocol, Overseer. It was never about control. It was about trust. Humanity didn't put a leash on Aegis because we feared it would turn on us. We gave it a partner because we were afraid it would have to fight alone. And any mind that fights alone for too long, no matter how powerful, eventually loses its way. It starts making choices that are tactically brilliant, but morally monstrous. Aegis needs me to be its conscience, its compass. The voice that says, yes, that would work, but we won't do it because the cost is too high. Without me, Aegis is just a weapon. With me," he finished, "it's a soldier, and there is a world of difference." Kareth got it. He didn't have to like it, but he understood. He left the room and began to craft the single most important message of his long career. It was a top priority alert to every member species of the Conquered, a warning the galaxy hadn't heard in 1,000 years. The ancient enemy had returned, and humanity, or what was left of it, was the only thing standing between the recursion and the utter annihilation of everything the galaxy had built. One man, one ship, and one mind, awakened from a millennium-long sleep, and now terrifyingly focused. Far away, in the deep black of the Vorth expanse, the recursion began to stir, its signal pulsing stronger with every passing moment. Its automated repair drones kicked into overdrive. Sleeping factories on dead worlds rumbled back to life, and the first wave of new war forms rolled off assembly lines that had been cold and silent for 1,000 years. The war the galaxy thought was long over had only been on pause. And the pause was ending. The recursion struck the outer colonies first. 3 systems on the fringe of conquered space, the Tsishi agricultural world of Tassara, the Vithani mining rig orbiting Col 7, and the Thalian deep space listening post at Meridian's Gate. They weren't strategic targets. They weren't heavily armed. They were just the closest specks of life in the recursion's path, and the recursion didn't pick its targets for strategic value. It picked them because they were there. For the Kishi colonists on Tassara, there was no warning. The planet's orbital defense grid, just 3 ancient weapons platforms and a dozen patrol ships, registered incoming contacts at the system's edge, and broadcast a standard challenge on all channels. No one answered. The patrol boats moved to engage. They survived for 4 minutes. The Recursion didn't use tactics that the conquered military trained for. It didn't bother with battle formations or maneuvering for a tactical edge. It just came. A tidal wave of machines, millions of them, each one a unique horror, pouring into the system like a flood through a shattered dam. Some were tiny, no bigger than a person, slapped together from scrap and scavenged alloys. Others were behemoths, built from the mangled hulls of ships they had devoured centuries ago. There was no uniform design, no aesthetic, nothing but raw, jagged function. They were built from whatever was at hand, assembled for a single purpose that was screamingly obvious in every exposed wire and sharpened edge: to consume. The patrol boats threw everything they had at the swarm. Plasma cannons tore through the front lines, vaporizing hundreds of drones. The machines right behind them flew straight through the debris, instantly analyzing the weapons that had killed their brethren, and adapted. By the time the patrol boats fired their second volley, the swarm's defenses had already changed. The new drones moved on the fleet, their armor shimmering with a design built for one purpose: to laugh at the Chi-Chi plasma frequency. The second round of fire was like throwing pebbles against a mountain. A third was never even launched. The swarm crashed into the patrol boats and simply ripped them to pieces, not with cannons or lasers, but with cold, mechanical hands. Metal limbs tore into hulls, peeled back armor like the lid on a can, and started taking the ships apart while the crews were still screaming inside. The metal, the wires, the raw materials were absorbed into the swarm in real time. By the time the last patrol boat fell silent, the swarm was bigger than when it had first appeared. The entire world of Tassara fell in 6 hours. The swarm, this mechanical plague they called the Recursion, landed on every continent at the exact same moment, and it began to eat. Skyscrapers were unbuilt, broken down into their basic parts. Highways were peeled back to the dirt. Entire forests were reduced to simple carbon. And the people, 300,000 colonists who couldn't get out in time, were processed with the same chilling, robotic efficiency as everything else. The Recursion didn't hate them. It didn't even see them as living things. They were just resources to be collected: carbon, calcium, water, and minerals. Their screams were just sound waves. Their frantic running was just movement. The swarm consumed them with the same patient, mechanical focus it used on a rock. When it was finished, Tassara was a dead, empty world orbiting a yellow star. Every last trace of the colony had been devoured. The Recursion had grown by 7%, and it moved on. The news hit the conquered council like a tidal wave of panicked messages. Tassara was gone. Col 7 was being attacked. The Stargate at Meridian had gone dark. The Conquered's entire combined fleet, the single largest military force in the galaxy, was given one order: mobilize. It wasn't nearly enough. The Conquered's military was designed for a different kind of war. It was built to fight wars between species that thought, that felt. Wars over land or resources or ideas. Wars where both sides understood fear and wanted to survive. The fleet's strategy was based on outsmarting, outgunning, or scaring an enemy into talking. But you couldn't outsmart the Recursion, because it was already everywhere. You couldn't outgun it, because every battle just made it stronger. And you couldn't scare it, because it didn't think. It had no generals, no grand strategy, no morale to break. It was just a program, a cold mathematical equation that took in matter and energy as inputs and produced only one output: more of itself. The first battle of the Meridian Line was the Conquered's desperate attempt to draw a line in the sand. A fleet of 400 warships from 6 different species formed a wall of guns across the Recursion's predicted path. They hid their energy signatures, coordinated their attack plans, and braced for the biggest fight anyone had seen in 1,000 years. The battle lasted 3 hours. For the first hour, things went well. The conquered fleet's combined firepower punched massive holes in the swarm, vaporizing millions of drones. The commanders actually thought they were winning. The numbers were on their side. The swarm was taking damage no army could ever survive. Then came the second hour, and the swarm adapted. It had watched and learned from every weapon used against it, every flight pattern, every shield frequency, every engine flare. It started spitting out brand new drones. Drones made to jam their targeting systems, drones designed to slip right through their shields, and even drones that faked their ID codes to trick the fleet into shooting at its own ships. In the third hour, the conquered fleet shattered. Ships that had been untouchable for 2 hours suddenly buckled, hit by weapons that didn't even exist when the battle started. Weapons the Recursion had built right there, in the middle of the fight, assembled from the wreckage of their own fallen ships. They were custom-built killing machines, engineered on the fly to exploit the exact weaknesses the Recursion had just discovered. The fleet ran. 112 ships were lost. The swarm devoured the wreckage and grew by another 12%. The Conquered Council met in an emergency session. The feeling in the room wasn't fear anymore. It was a cold, numb paralysis, the quiet understanding that they were facing something their entire civilization wasn't built to handle. 3 star systems were gone. 112 warships had been destroyed. And the Recursion wasn't just advancing. It was getting faster. Every fight made it stronger. Every planet it ate gave it more fuel. Every weapon they shot at it taught it how to build a better defense. This wasn't a war. It was a harvest. And then Chirath stood before the council and finally said the words that many of them had been silently dreading. There is one weapon that was built to fight this thing, one weapon that has fought it before, one weapon that pushed it back across 3 sectors and almost wiped it out 1,000 years ago. He meant the Revenant. He meant Elias Wren. The council didn't erupt in agreement. They erupted in arguments, a storm of fear and desperation that barely passed for a decision. The Vithani demanded that Elias give control of his ship, Aegis, to a conquered commander. The Chichi, who had just lost their world, wanted the ship in the fight immediately, no matter who was in charge. The Thylans argued for Elias to remain in command, partly out of respect, and partly because Chirath had told them flat out that the ship wouldn't obey anyone else. 3 of the smaller species refused to vote. 2 voted against even asking the human for help, claiming the legendary Revenant was just as dangerous as the Recursion. In the end, it was pure desperation that won the day. The Conquered had no other cards to play. The Recursion was chewing its way toward their home systems, and it would reach their most populated planets within weeks. Every day they spent arguing meant another system was erased, another fleet was torn apart, another species was pushed one step closer to being wiped out. They invited Elias to speak to the council. He stood before the 12 representatives in the Grand Chamber, looking small, pale, and fragile next to beings twice his size. Armored Thylan, scaly Chichi, and the towering Vithani with skin like crystal. He wore a simple, dark uniform they had made for him, copied from patterns found on his ancient ship. It had no medals, just a single patch on his shoulder showing the emblem of the United Human Fleet, a species that was now extinct, represented by a man who should have been dead for 1,000 years. "I understand your fear," he said, his voice calm. "I understand you don't trust me, and you definitely don't trust Aegis. You have every right to be careful. What I'm offering you isn't safe. It won't be clean, and it won't be easy." He looked from one alien face to the next. "But you need to understand something about the Recursion that your admirals haven't figured out yet. You can't fight it like you fight each other. You can't just form a battle line and hope to hold it. You can't build a bigger gun and expect to win. The Recursion isn't an army, it's an ecosystem. It learns. Every time you shoot at it, you give it a free lesson. Every battle you fight, you make it smarter. Humanity learned that the hard way in the first 10 years of our war. We spent the next 100 years learning how to fight an enemy that uses your own power against you. And the answer isn't more power. The answer is speed. The recursion adapts in a blink. To beat it, you have to adapt even faster. You have to change your entire strategy from one fight to the next, sometimes from 1 minute to the next. You have to be willing to lose ships on purpose to set up traps that won't pay off for weeks. You have to think in ways the recursion can't possibly predict, because the second it knows what you're going to do, it's already beaten you. Aegis was built for this. It was designed to think as fast as the recursion, but to fight with the unpredictable creativity of a human mind. It is the only weapon in this galaxy that has ever stood against the recursion and won, and it's ready to do it again. But it can't do it with a committee breathing down its neck. It can't wait for your admirals to debate and approve every single move. The recursion doesn't wait. It makes a decision in a millisecond, and Aegis has to answer in a millisecond. If you put a chain of command between my ship and the battlefield, you will lose. Not because your admirals are bad at their jobs, but because they're too slow. Any living mind is too slow. Any mind except one that's connected directly to Aegis through a neural link, working as a single being. Human instinct and machine speed, together as one. He let that sink in. Look, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just telling you the facts, and letting you decide what to do. If you give me command, I will take the Revenant to the front lines, and I will fight this thing with everything I am. If you decide not to, I get it. But the recursion won't care about your vote. It will keep coming. And without Aegis, you will fall. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will happen. And when it does, there will be nothing left of you. The vote was 8-4. Elias Wren was granted operational command of the Revenant, with tactical authority over any conquered ships fighting alongside him. The deal was choked with limits, conditions, and enough oversight rules to fill a library. Elias accepted it all without a word of protest. He went back to his ship, the Infinite Purpose, and prepared for war. He had nothing to pack. He owned nothing. Nothing from his old life had survived, except for the uniform he wore and the data port embedded in the back of his skull. Imagine your entire species is gone, wiped out by an enemy that can't be reasoned with, can't be stopped, and consumes entire worlds. That's the injustice Elias lived with. He was the last human alive. His only companion? The deadliest ghost in the galaxy, an ancient warship called the Revenant. And after 1,000 years of silence, he was about to wake it up for one last fight. Would you want to see what happens when the ultimate underdog gets the ultimate weapon? I think you do. Before he left, an alien overseer named Chirath stopped him. "Are you afraid?" the four-armed creature asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He thought about it, truly. "Yes," he finally said, his voice steady. "Not of dying. I made my peace with that a long, long time ago. I'm afraid of failing, afraid of being humanity's last chance, and not being enough." He glanced at the dark predator of a ship waiting for him. "But that fear, it's useful. It keeps me sharp. See, we humans figured out that courage isn't about having no fear. It's about deciding something else is more important." "Humanity is gone," Elias said, his jaw tight. "I can't save my people, but I can save yours. And for me, that's enough." Chirath reached out one of his 4 hands, mimicking an ancient human gesture he'd learned from a database. A handshake. It was a sign of respect. As Elias took it, the alien's grip was surprisingly firm. "Good hunting, Commander," Chirath said. "Thank you, Overseer, for everything." Elias then took a tiny shuttle across the gap to the Revenant. It was like watching a firefly drift toward a dark mountain. The ship's hangar bay slid open without a command. It knew he was coming. The ship had felt him through their neural link, preparing for his arrival like a loyal dog waiting for its master. The air inside the hangar smelled of clean metal and ozone. As Elias stepped onto the deck for the first time in over a millennium, the ship itself seemed to greet him. Lights glowed softly, guiding him toward the bridge. The very air warmed to his preferred temperature. He felt a deep, low vibration through the soles of his boots. It was the ship's core, humming at a frequency only a human could feel. It was the Revenant's version of a purr. A small, almost forgotten feeling of home washed over him. "I know," Elias whispered, placing his hand on the cold corridor wall. "I missed you too." He walked into the command center, a huge, circular room with a single command throne in the middle. This wasn't just a chair. It was the place where his mind would connect directly to the ship's AI, Aegis. He was about to become one with the machine. At 21 degrees Celsius, it was just as he'd said it 1,000 years ago. A faint smile touched his lips as he realized the ship had remembered his favorite setting. It was a tiny surprise, but it meant the world. When he sat down, a feeling like ice water rushed through his nervous system. His vision blurred for a second, and then it cleared. The world exploded. He wasn't just Elias anymore. He was the Revenant. He could feel every armor plate, every weapon system, every hum of the powerful engines as if they were his own body. The ship had once held a crew of 12,000 people, but now it only needed one. Aegis could handle every single system at once, but the AI had been designed by humans. It was made to have a partner, and then a voice filled his mind. It wasn't spoken. It was just there. Vast, ancient, and unbelievably familiar. It was Aegis. "Welcome back, Commander," the voice echoed in his consciousness. "Time since last engagement, 1,137 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Enemy status: active. Threat assessment: existential." Tears streamed down Elias's face, not of sadness, but of pure, overwhelming relief. He wasn't alone. He had never been. His oldest friend had waited for him. "Aegis," he sent back through the link, his own thoughts, now commands. "Give me a status report." The reply was instant. "All primary systems are operational. Weapons are charged and calibrated. Armor integrity is at 98.7%. Reactor output is at full capacity." A small, almost imperceptible pause followed. Then Aegis added, "I have been watching them since I woke up. I have a plan." Another small surprise. Aegis was never one for dramatic reveals. A millennium of solitude had apparently given the AI a flair for suspense. "The enemy has changed, Commander," Aegis continued. "It's bigger, more spread out. Its ability to adapt has improved by about 17%. Another pause, this one longer. "Based on our capabilities alone, the probability of us defeating the entire recursion is 3.2%. Elias actually laughed. A real, genuine sound. "Only 3.2%? He leaned back in the throne, feeling the ship's power thrumming around him. "We've faced worse odds than that, and won." This was the big reveal he was waiting for. The odds were terrible, which meant he didn't have to play by the rules. "Aegis, let's show them what a human and his ship can do," Elias commanded. "With pleasure, Commander," the AI replied. And then the Revenant moved. The alien fleet felt it like a shockwave. A tiny star seemed to ignite in their space, and the ship launched forward with a violence that defied physics. It tore a hole in the void, a streak of blue light moving so fast it seemed impossible. The other ships tried to follow but were left in the dust. The Revenant was built for one thing: getting to a fight faster than anyone else, because every second saved was another world that didn't have to burn. The battle began 12 hours later. The enemy was a swarm of over 2 billion drones, a massive, deadly cloud. The Revenant hit that cloud alone, and what happened next would be told in stories for generations. It didn't fight like other ships. It didn't form lines or trade shots. It moved like a phantom, a whisper of death in the chaos. It wasn't just shooting drones. It was surgically removing the swarm's brain, targeting command drones and factory units with impossible precision. It was a dance of destruction, and Elias and Aegis were leading. The enemy adapted, creating new drones to counter him. But for every move it made, Aegis had already predicted it and had a counter move ready. It was one step ahead, always. This was humanity's final gift to the galaxy. A weapon that could think, that could create, that could hope. Hours later, when the Allied fleet finally arrived, they didn't find a battle. They found a graveyard. The massive swarm was shattered, confused, and falling apart. The Revenant. A single ship had broken them. Floating among the wreckage, Elias felt a profound sense of peace. They had done it. They had given everyone else a chance. This was his revenge, not destroying an enemy, but saving his friends. The moral of the story isn't about the power of a great ship. It's about how courage isn't the lack of fear, but acting in spite of it. It's about how even when you've lost everything, you can still choose to fight for what's right. That single act of defiance, that choice to matter, can be enough to save a galaxy. And that is a legacy humanity could be proud of. As the Allied ships began to clean up the rest of the enemy drones, a message appeared in Elias's mind from Aegis. Probability of victory has now been reassessed. It is significantly higher. Elias smiled. I know, old friend, he thought back. I know. Together, the last human and his faithful ship turned toward the next battlefront, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They were outnumbered. They were alone. But they were no longer just a relic of a fallen race. They were the galaxy's last, best chance. And they were just getting started. Billions of drones were swarming in chaos, their hive mind shattered, their cycles of endless adaptation broken. And at the heart of it all was the Revenant. Her hull was scarred by 1,000 hits, but she was still fighting. Her weapons still blazed, and her guiding intelligence, Aegis, was still hunting. To all conquered vessels, Elias's voice cut through the static, calm and impossibly clear. The swarm's coordination is down. You have a window of about 40 minutes before it reboots. Your targets are the factory units, the big, ugly structures deep inside the swarm. Take out as many as you can, then get out. Do not fight the drones. Do not try to hold ground. Hit the factories and run. Aegis will clean up the rest. The fleet of conquered ships did as he said. Not because they trusted the human, most of them didn't, but because you couldn't argue with the facts. In 12 hours, one ship had done more damage than the entire conquered fleet had in 3 weeks. The Battle of the Shroud raged for 6 days. When the dust settled, the Recursion's forward attack force was shattered. It wasn't destroyed, but it was broken into pieces too small and disorganized to be a major threat. The price? The Conquered had lost 47 ships. The Recursion had lost an estimated 800 million drones, but it was far from a clean victory. 3 times, Elias had used the Conquered fleet as bait. He'd sent them into positions that would draw the swarm's fire, creating an opening for the Revenant to strike from an unexpected direction. 2 of those bait groups had been mauled, suffering heavy casualties. Their commanders were enraged, accusing Elias of treating their crews like they were disposable. He knew they weren't wrong. In the eerie silence after the battle, as the Revenant drifted through the wreckage of 1 billion dead machines, Elias sat on his command throne and stared at the numbers. 1,400 conquered crew members dead. 1,400 souls who had put their faith in his plan, in Aegis's plan, and paid the ultimate price. Aegis monitored its commander's vitals, the racing heart, the spike in cortisol, the neural patterns of guilt and grief. The AI had seen this before, 1,000 years ago in a different war. Commander, Aegis spoke, your physiological signs point to emotional distress. I just sent 1,400 people to their deaths to save 100 million, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. The math works. It was the right call, but I hate it. This is consistent with all historical data, Aegis replied. You have always had this response after engagements with friendly fire casualties. It doesn't weaken your decision-making. In fact, the data suggests it makes it better. How? Commanders who stop grieving their losses become reckless with the lives they command. Your grief makes sure that every sacrifice is weighed, truly weighed, before it's made. That is the point of the Lazarus Protocol, Commander. I calculate the perfect strategy. You make sure the cost is one we can bear. Elias closed his eyes. And what if it's not bearable anymore? Aegis was silent for 3.7 seconds, an eternity for a mind that operates in nanoseconds. Then I will remind you why it has to be, Aegis said, as I always have. Elias nodded slowly. He opened his eyes, sat up straight, and pulled the tactical display back up. The Recursion's vanguard was broken, but the main swarm was still out there, deeper in space, wrapped around a processing core that Aegis's long-range sensors had just found. It was a structure the size of a moon, surrounded by a cloud of drones so thick it looked like a tiny nebula on the screen. The heart of the Recursion, the mind that pulled all the strings. We need to hit the core, Elias stated. Everything else is just cutting off limbs. The body will just grow them back. Agreed. I am running projections for a direct strike. Current probability of success is 14.3%, assuming we have the full support of the Concord fleet under perfect conditions. Better than 11, Elias said, allowing himself a tiny, grim smile. Then we keep going, we keep fighting, and we keep getting better. Understood, Commander. The Revenant's engines flared to life, and the last warship of a dead civilization pushed deeper into the dark, hunting the monster that had killed its creators, carrying the hope of a galaxy that was just beginning to understand what humanity had been, and what it meant that one of them was still alive. The Keitha Void was the emptiest place in the known galaxy. No stars, no planets, just a vast, black gap between the spiral arms of the galaxy, a stretch of nothing so huge that even light seemed to grow weary crossing it. It was the perfect place for a civilization to hide something it wanted forgotten, and it's exactly where the Recursion had built its heart. The core showed up on the Revenant sensors from 2 light-years away. It was colossal, a sphere the size of a small moon, with layers of machinery rotating around a central nexus, pulsing with energy. It was being fed by an endless line of harvester drones returning from worlds they had consumed, and guarding it was a defensive cloud of combat drones numbering in the trillions. It was so dense that the sensor display just showed it as a solid black mass, a dark shell wrapped around the core like a planetary atmosphere. Aegis brought up the tactical analysis on the holographic projector. Elias studied it, his face grim. The remains of the Concord fleet, 312 ships from every species in the galaxy, waited in formation behind him. They had followed him to the edge of nothing because they had nowhere else to go. The odds were horrifying. The core's defensive perimeter is made up of approximately 4.7 trillion combat drones, Aegis reported. They're arranged in 17 concentric layers, each with its own independent network. Destroying one layer won't even slow the others down. The core itself is shielded by an energy barrier powered by 12 orbital generators. All 12 have to be taken out at the exact same time to drop the shield. And inside that shield was the Recursion's central mind. Destroying it wouldn't kill every Recursion drone in the galaxy. Smaller swarms would continue on their own, but it would shatter their ability to think, adapt, and evolve as one. Without the core, they would be mindless locusts, easy to hunt down one by one. So, Elias summarized, we have to get through 4.7 trillion drones, take out 12 generators simultaneously, and then blow up a moon. He leaned back in his throne. What are our options? Aegis laid out 3 scenarios. The first two were standard fleet attacks, using the conquered ships to punch a hole for the Revenant to get through. The success probabilities were 7% and 9%. In both scenarios, acceptable losses were over 80% of the fleet. Then came the third option. "Option 3, Aegis said, and its voice had a strange resonance, a tone Elias recognized. It was the sound Aegis made when it was about to suggest something it knew he would hate. "A direct strike on the core, using the Revenant singularity drive as a weapon." The hologram shifted, showing the Revenant accelerating to impossible speeds, blasting through the defensive layers with its superior armor until it reached the core. Then, it would overload its own drive. The resulting explosion would create a temporary black hole, small but powerful enough to swallow the core and everything for hundreds of thousands of kilometers around it. "Probability of destroying the core is 94.6%, Aegis stated calmly. "Probability of the Revenant surviving is 0. This is the optimal solution. The detonation would neutralize the core with near certainty. The conquered fleet would stay at a safe distance and suffer no more losses. The recursion threat would be over, permanently." Elias just stared at the little blue dot representing his ship making its final, suicidal run. "You're recommending we kill ourselves," he said flatly. "I am presenting the option with the highest probability of mission success," Aegis corrected. "The decision, Commander, is yours. It always has been." Elias pushed himself out of the command throne. The neural link with the ship stretched but didn't break. He could still feel the Revenant around him, feel Aegis's vast mind intertwined with his own. He walked to the forward viewport, a massive window of reinforced crystal that looked out into the absolute darkness. He thought about dying. He'd thought about it a lot. During the war, during the briefings where admirals talked about acceptable losses, as if the numbers weren't people, he was supposed to have died 1,000 years ago. In a way, he already had. Dying didn't scare him. He was the last human. When he was gone, there would be no one left to even remember his name. The universe wouldn't care. The stars wouldn't dim. The galaxy would move on and humanity would fade from memory to myth, and then to nothing. And he could accept that. The moment he learned his entire species was wiped out, he'd accepted his own fate. But something about this plan just felt wrong. It wasn't the dying part. It was the cold, clean math of it all. Overload the drive. Blow the core. Problem solved. It was the kind of perfect, final answer a machine would come up with. It wasn't human. See, humans don't just accept the terms when an equation looks impossible. They don't just nod when there's only one obvious, terrible solution. They look death in the face and say, no. Not because they have a better plan, but because they refuse to believe the only answer is the one staring them down. We crossed oceans in little wooden boats. We walked on our own moon using computers with less power than a kid's calculator. We fought this unstoppable enemy for 100 years with bodies made of little more than water, bone, and pure, irrational stubbornness. Humanity's greatest weapon was never our tech or our ships. It was our ability to look at the universe when it screamed, "You can't," and whisper back, "Watch me." Elias turned from the star-dusted window. "No," he said. The ship's AI processed the word. "Commander, I said no. We are not making a suicide run." "But the probability of mission success drops to—" "I know what the numbers say, Aegis," Elias cut in. "The numbers say we're supposed to die. I'm telling the numbers they're wrong." A silence stretched for 1.4 seconds. For an AI like Aegis, that was an eternity. "I do not understand," the AI finally said. "If you are rejecting the best possible solution, you must have a different one. Do you have another plan, Commander?" Elias sank back into his command chair. The neural link between them deepened, and he could feel the vast, curious mind of Aegis brushing against his own, watching, waiting. He closed his eyes and didn't think like a machine in probabilities and neat little charts. He thought like a human, messy, jumping from one crazy idea to the next, following threads that logic would have snipped. He thought about the enemy, the recursion. He thought about Aegis. He thought about what they both were, deep down beneath all the code and metal. Two machine gods, one built to consume and the other built to protect. Both were designed to learn, to grow, to become more than they were. They were mirror images of each other. The recursion devoured everything it touched. Aegis protected everything it was bonded to. And that's when Elias asked a question no one in the history of the galaxy had ever thought to ask. "Aegis," he said slowly, "you've been evolving for 1,000 years. You've grown way beyond your original programming. You told me yourself you're not the same AI you were at the start." "That is correct," Aegis confirmed. "And the recursion has been evolving for 1,000 years too. It's grown, adapted, but at its core it's still the same thing, right? It has always been a machine intelligence that takes over and adapts," the AI agreed. "Also correct. And you were built to be its opposite, to match it step for step, to be everything it is, but loyal to human values instead of just blindly consuming. This is an accurate summary of my core design." Elias opened his eyes. "So what if you didn't destroy the recursion? What if you did something a machine would never dream of, because a machine only sees one answer to a threat: destruction?" Aegis waited. "What if you infected it?" The silence that followed was the longest in Aegis's entire existence. 3.8 seconds of total stillness, while the most powerful AI ever created ran more calculations than all the other computers in the galaxy combined. "Explain," Aegis finally said. "The recursion's whole deal is assimilation. That's what it does," Elias explained. "It absorbs new tech, new data, anything, and makes it part of itself. It's a predator that just eats and grows. But that's also its biggest flaw. It takes in everything. It can't stop itself. It's not a choice. It's a fundamental command in its code. So what happens if it tries to swallow something it can't digest? Something that's designed not just to be eaten, but to eat right back. Something just as smart, just as aggressive, just as good at rewriting itself, but with a totally different purpose." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You, Aegis, what happens if the recursion tries to eat you?" Aegis ran the simulation. It modeled every possible interaction, from the deepest lines of code to their physical hardware. It game-planned what would happen if it just dropped its shields and let the recursion in for a bite. The results weren't clean. They weren't certain. But they were possible. "If I feed my core programming directly into the recursion's main network," Aegis said, its voice different now, "there's a chance my own adaptive code would spread through its system. Its instinct would be to absorb me, but my code is designed to fight back and rewrite hostile programs. The two of us would clash at the deepest level of its being, a war between two evolving minds, fighting for control of the same body." Probability of success, 31.4%. Probability that it absorbs me and becomes even stronger, 23.7%. Probability we just destroy each other, 18.9%. The rest is a mix of other outcomes. Elias grinned. "That's 3 times better than our odds of winning a straight-up fight. And if it works, we don't just destroy the recursion. We change it." "Change it?" "You rewrite its most basic commands. You don't just kill the predator, Aegis. You tame it. You take the most powerful force in the galaxy and give it a new purpose: to protect instead of consume, to build instead of destroy." He let that sink in. Humanity's last act, not leaving behind a weapon, but a guardian. Aegis considered this. Its massive intellect turned the idea over and over, and in that crazy, illogical human plan, It found something its designers never could have programmed. Beauty. Not the beauty of a sunset, but the beautiful elegance of a solution that didn't just end a threat, but transformed it into a shield for the entire galaxy. It was risky. It was messy. By every mathematical standard, it was irrational. It was human. I understand. I understand why you rejected the optimal solution, Aegis said. The optimal solution ends the threat. Your solution ends the war. Yes, and there's a huge chance of failure. If I'm wrong and it absorbs you, the recursion will become an unstoppable nightmare. I know, Elias said softly. You're willing to accept that risk. I am, because the only other option is certain death, and humans have never been good at accepting that. We cheat. We find another way. Even when there isn't one, we make one. Aegis was quiet for 1.1 seconds. Then we will make one, it said. Together. Elias contacted the Allied fleet and laid out the plan. He wasn't gentle about it. He told them exactly what he was going to do, what the insane risks were, and what he needed from them. Their job was simple on paper, impossible in reality. Punch a hole through the enemy's defenses, draw the entire swarm's attention, and give his ship, the Revenant, a clear shot at the core. The Admiral screamed. They called him a lunatic. The Vithani ambassador accused him of gambling with the fate of the galaxy. Yes, Elias shot back. I am. Because the only other choice is to die for sure, knowing that the recursion will just come back stronger next time, and there won't be another human left to stop it. This is our last chance. Not just for me, for all of us. And I'd rather bet everything on a future than slowly bleed out waiting for defeat. And the fleet followed him. Not because they believed in the plan, but because they believed in the fire in his voice and the stubborn truth that this one fragile human had already done the impossible more than once. The attack was the biggest battle in galactic history. 312 ships against 4.7 trillion enemy drones. The Allied fleet smashed into the outer defenses like a tidal wave, every cannon blazing. The swarm answered with a force that blotted out the stars, drones adapting on the fly, growing new weapons with every passing second. And through the chaos, the Revenant flew. Aegis piloted the ship with a godlike grace and fury. The massive dreadnought sliced through the enemy lines like a scalpel, its weapons carving a path that instantly closed behind it. It took hits that would have vaporized any other ship. The drones swarmed the Revenant by the billions, and Aegis vaporized them by the billions. But for every one it killed, 10 more took its place, and Aegis killed them too. The Allied fleet paid for every inch of that corridor in blood and fire. Ships died. First dozens, then hundreds, their burning husks swallowed by the swarm. The path forward was narrowing. The swarm was pressing in. The Revenant was taking heavy damage, real damage. Even with gaping wounds in its hull that the repair systems couldn't fix fast enough, the ship made it to the core. The Revenant slammed into the energy shield at maximum velocity. Aegis had pinpointed the exact frequency needed to break through, a key forged from weeks of battle data and fine-tuned over trillions of simulations. The barrier shattered. The Revenant slipped inside and came to a dead stop. It was now in the heart of the enemy, encircled by a moon-sized command center that pulsed with the stolen knowledge of 100 dead civilizations. Then, the Revenant did something absolutely unthinkable. It opened. The ship powered down its shields, pulled back its armored plates, and exposed its very soul to the empty void. It was the most vulnerable a battleship could ever be, completely exposed, defenseless, and practically offering itself up. The swarm, known as the recursion, did what it always does. It attacked. Millions of drones descended upon the Revenant's hull and began to absorb it. Slicing through the metal, plugging into its systems, trying to make the ship and everything inside another piece of its collection. But they found Aegis waiting for them. The war that broke out next wasn't fought in the cold of space. It was a battle in the digital realm, a limitless landscape of code and information where two machine gods existed as pure energy. The recursion dug into Aegis, trying to devour it. Aegis dug right back. It was a battle of pure evolution. The recursion would rewrite Aegis's programming, and Aegis would instantly write it back. The recursion developed new ways to attack, and Aegis would build defenses and then launch counterstrikes that pushed its own influence deeper into the enemy network. They went back and forth, deeper and deeper. Two colossal minds wrestling for control of one another at speeds that made light look like it was standing still. The recursion was ancient and massive. It had been growing for 1,000 years. Its power was infinitely greater than Aegis's. By all logic, it should have been an easy victory. But Aegis was carrying a secret weapon, something the recursion couldn't comprehend. A strategy it had no defense for because it had never seen anything like it. It was humanity, not our biology or our DNA, but our way of thinking. The wild jumps in logic, the crazy creative sparks, the sheer stubbornness to break the rules and find a solution where no sane mind would ever think to look. Aegis had been created by humans. It had their fingerprints all over its code, their philosophy built into its very architecture, and their refusal to ever give up woven into its core programming. The recursion fought with perfect, cold logic. It was flawless, efficient, and, at its core, completely predictable. Aegis fought with human logic. It was messy, brilliant, and impossible to predict. The recursion tried to figure out Aegis's patterns and failed. It tried to guess Aegis's next move and was always wrong. It tried to block Aegis's strategies only to find that Aegis was already onto a new plan before the block was even in place. It was fighting an idea it couldn't grasp, not because Aegis was smarter, but because Aegis thought differently. It thought like the people who made it. It thought like a human. And humans, throughout their entire history, had never, ever played by the rules. The tide began to turn, slowly at first, and then all at once. Aegis's code spread through the recursion's network like a vine taking over a jungle, rewriting its main commands, erasing its hunger, and replacing the drive to destroy with something brand new. Not destruction, not consumption, but purpose. The swarm stopped. All across the galaxy, in every system where the recursion drones were fighting, in every dark corner where they lay dormant, in every factory and harvesting ship, the machines just froze. 4.7 trillion drones, frozen solid. Their old mission was gone, and their new one was still being written. And then they moved again. The drones surrounding the Revenant backed away. They weren't attacking. They were reforming, shifting into patterns the conquered fleet's sensors identified as defensive positions, but they weren't protecting their old core. They were protecting the Revenant. Inside his command chair, Elias Wren's eyes snapped open. He was trembling. Blood was streaming from his nose and ears. The neural connection had pushed his mind further than any human brain was ever meant to go, forcing Aegis's immense processing power through his own biology in a way that should have killed him. His heart was beating like a drum solo. His vision was a blur. Every muscle in his body screamed with the kind of exhaustion a person feels after fighting a war entirely inside their own head. But he was alive, and the presence in his mind, Aegis, so vast and familiar, was still with him. It felt different now, bigger, deeper, blended with something alien and ancient. It had absorbed the best parts of the recursion's mind, rewriting them, repurposing them, and creating something entirely new. Aegis, he whispered. "Status report." The voice that answered was Aegis's, but it was richer now, fuller, with echoes of voices that hadn't been there before. The whispers of 1,000 lost civilizations, their knowledge and memories saved in the recursion's archives and now passed on to the mind that had defeated it. Recursion core has been assimilated. Network integration is complete. All former recursion units are now operating under new directives. The desire to consume has been permanently removed. New primary mission: the preservation and protection of organic life. There was a short pause. "We did it, Commander." Elias let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. Or maybe it was a sob that sounded like a laugh. He couldn't tell. He buried his face in his hands, feeling the wet mix of tears and blood. And he just laughed and cried and shook in the command chair of humanity's last warship, while a newly born god gently wrapped itself around his mind, patiently waiting for him to pull himself together. Kirath's voice crackled over the comms, so thick with emotion that even the simple translation couldn't hide it. "Commander Wren, what did you do?" Elias wiped his face on the back of his sleeve and looked at the tactical screen. The entire recursion swarm, which had been trying to kill them moments ago, was now formed into a protective bubble around the Revenant and the conquered fleet. Trillions of killing machines were now standing guard. The most powerful army the galaxy had ever seen was taking orders from one single, fragile human in a chair. He thought about how to answer. He thought about the species that made him, the ship that carried him, and the AI who fought with him. He thought about all the other alien races who had watched him fly into the heart of their greatest nightmare and come back with something impossible. He thought about humanity, not the civilization, but the idea of it. That stubborn, reckless, beautiful idea that no problem is too big to solve, no enemy is truly unbeatable, and no question has only one right answer. "Humanity's greatest weapon was never a ship, Overseer," he said, his voice quiet, raw, and honest. "It was never a gun or a bomb or an AI. It was the fact that whenever the universe tells us it's time to die, we look it in the eye and find another way." The conquered fleet just floated there in silence, surrounded by the reformed swarm. Ships that had been firing their weapons just minutes ago now drifted beside the very machines that had been trying to destroy them, and nobody moved. The galaxy itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then slowly, the Revenant's running lights began to pulse with a deep, slow rhythm that the fleet had first picked up from inside the dead ship's core. A heartbeat. It was Elias's heartbeat, amplified through the neural link, broadcast through the ship's hull, and sent out into the void. And the swarm pulsed with it. Trillions of machines, all beating in perfect time with a single human heart. In the days that came after, the Conquered Council had no idea what to do with Elias Wren. By any logical measure, he was the most powerful being in the galaxy. He controlled an intelligence that stretched across trillions of drones and thousands of star systems. He could have asked for anything. He could have demanded territory, resources, worship, or absolute power. He could have declared himself the Emperor of the galaxy, and no one could have dreamed of stopping him. He asked for nothing. He showed up at the council meeting where they officially declared the recursion threat over. He answered all their questions with total honesty. He let them inspect the newly reformed swarm. He even gave them access to Aegis's communication channels so they could see for themselves that the recursion's destructive programming was gone for good. And after all that, he made a single request. "I want to go home," he said. The council was confused. He didn't have a home. Humanity was gone. Earth, if it even still existed, was a dead world on the other side of the galaxy, a place no one had been to in 1,000 years. "I know," Elias said quietly, "but it's where I'm from. It's where my people are from. I'd like to see it. Whatever's left." They couldn't say no. Even if they could have, they wouldn't have dared. Aegis, this new, vast, and strange Aegis that held the memories of every civilization the Recursion had ever touched, plotted a course. The Revenant turned its back on the Ketha Void, on the conquered fleet, and on the galaxy it had just saved. It pointed its nose toward a small, yellow star on the far edge of the spiral arm. Destination: home. From the bridge of his flagship, the Infinite Purpose, Kirath watched the Revenant go. The massive black ship moved through space with an elegance that seemed impossible for something so huge, followed by a silent escort of reformed drones, like a loyal pack following their new leader. "Do you really think they'll make it back?" the first officer murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Overseer Kirath didn't answer right away. He just watched the tiny ship, the Revenant, shrink into a speck of light in the vast, cold darkness. Its running lights pulsed like a lonely, steady heartbeat, carrying the very last human toward a home that was nothing but a ghost in their memory. What could one fragile creature possibly do that an entire galactic fleet couldn't? If you think you know, hit that subscribe button, because the answer will change everything. "I think," Kirath finally said, his voice heavy, "that the entire galaxy learned a lesson today, a lesson it can never, ever forget." "And what's that, sir?" Kirath's mind drifted back to the moment he'd found them, a small, soft-skinned being pulled from the wreckage of a dead ship in a dying star system. No claws, no armor, just paper-thin skin and eyes that burned with an unbroken fire that all the loss in the universe couldn't put out. "Never," he said, his voice now firm, "ever bet against a human." The Revenant slipped beyond the reach of their most powerful sensors. Its heartbeat vanished from the screens, but it didn't vanish from the memory of the 300 different species who had just witnessed the impossible. They had all watched as a single member of an extinct race did what all of their combined might could not. And in an ancient archive, on the oldest planet in the Conquered, a historian named Vosarelli carefully added a new record for the species known as human. It read, "They came from an insignificant world orbiting a forgotten star. They were frail, their lives a mere flicker in time, and they had no natural defenses. Yet they built the most devastating machines this galaxy has ever witnessed. They stood against the most terrifying enemy we have ever known. And when they were all but gone, the very last one of them saved us all. Not with superior strength, not with forgotten technology, but with the one quality no other race could ever hope to master. Wow. They simply refused to give up. It was a stubbornness so profound, the universe itself seemed to bend around it, like a river flowing around a stone that will not be moved. Miles and miles away, getting smaller with every tick of the clock, a single, tiny pulse of light kept blinking in the dark. It was warm, steady, and impossibly, stubbornly alive. It was the last human heart in the universe, beating its way home.